Thank you. We continue the previous discussion in a way, but we focus more on the newly industrialized countries, but our emphasis is much more on India. Okay, so we know SMEs and the entrepreneurs, we don't distinguish them in this paper, but they play a very important role in these newly industrialized countries, or specifically the regions that we are looking at, some of the BRICS countries, as well as some of the ASEAN countries. So the entrepreneurs, they play a very significant role. And according to some of the statistics from the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation, SMEs, they account for 97% of all businesses in terms of business counts. And then they also account for over half of employment, okay? And their contribution to GDP has been in the range of 40 to 60%. I think though in India, the contribution is approximately around 40%. Now, the SMEs in the Asian context, they differ significantly, particularly the Indian SMEs. And a large proportion of these SMEs, they are organized as micro, small, or medium enterprises. And this classification is done on the basis of turnover, investment, and so on. Okay, so what we look at in this paper is what is the early evidence on the effects of COVID-19 on entrepreneurship in India. There are many surveys that have been conducted. So we haven't conducted our own survey, but we are trying to synthesize what has come out of those surveys. And we are reflecting on the interviews that we conducted over the last 2-3 years, those entrepreneurs, what is happening to them. How does the COVID-19 effects in India compare with other countries? When we looked at other countries, we tried to look at countries with similar population. There aren't that many, obviously. And we couldn't quite consider China because of lack of data specifically that we needed. So we focus in this study on India, but we also try and compare it with comparable countries. We rely on many sources, including, I'll come back to that. So we look at the entrepreneurial indicators, many of those things we look at before and after. We use several sources, but mostly relied on the GEM global reports. We couldn't access the micro data given the embargo that is there on the data. So we went to reports, culled out the data on those indicators, and then try to compare them. We also looked at academic journals where there have been publications. I think this morning we have some of the presentations dealing with systematic literature or the literature review on impact of COVID-19 on the SMEs. And we also looked at many business periodicals. There have been surveys that are conducted by many consulting agencies. We did consult them as well. We use the GEM framework to understand what is happening to entrepreneurship more broadly. We start with the attitudes and perceptions. We looked at entrepreneurship impact. We also look at motivations, then the entrepreneurial activity, and we look at entrepreneurial framework conditions, and also specifically what are the effects of COVID-19 on the SMEs in the Indian context. And we also consider what is the future. We also have done in the last few years a study on looking at services, professional services in India, Malaysia, and Australia. And we will probably start with that, and then we go on to look at the trends in entrepreneurship in the Indian context. Sujana will present briefly the process that has been adopted in looking at the some of these service sector businesses and the comparison between these different countries.
Good afternoon, everyone. I think our key ideas for this presentation were informed by the earlier interviews that we conducted in the professional services sector, looking at the nano, micro, and small and medium-sized businesses. We have done more than 80 interviews within Australia, both rural and metro areas, Malaysia, and then India as well. So apart from doing the systematic literature review, we embarked on first-hand information collection through in-depth interviews. So what we identified here after gathering the interview data is that like particularly within the small business sector, one size does not fit all. We all know this phrase because most of the academic papers and practitioner papers highlight this. And apart from that, like we were able to tease out the macro level factors, which will filter through the meso or business level factors and further filter through the micro or individual level factors. And there is a neat intersectionality framework here. So for example, with the macro or societal level factors, it's mainly the business performance and how it matches the expectations of various stakeholders. So for example, like within the Indian context and the Malaysian context, similar opportunities were not offered to male business owner managers and the female business owner managers. So there are gender stereotypes which are very prominent, and that became very evident. And at the meso or business level factors, again, the differentiation is evident in terms of the nature and type and extent of work that is allocated to different employees. And similarly, the flexibility of work, so which is a prominent feature within the Australian context. However, within the Indian and Malaysian context, time is equated to money. So flexible work practices are not very prominent. And at the micro or individual level, the career progression for various employees working within a business, it's not the same opportunity that's presented to them. So of course, there are life cycle stages that interfere with women's career progression. If we exclude that, women themselves, they show a lot of reluctance to progress in their careers, particularly in the small and medium-sized businesses. We have also gathered from the interviews, there is a lot of reluctance and inertia, which then links to the family responsibilities. So that's these are the major macro themes and micro themes that we have culled out from the interviews. Given the country context, within Malaysia, ethnicity is a major micro theme which interferes with the meso business level factor. So here we know that the Malaysian context, they have the three prominent ethnic groups like the native Malays, and then they have Indian Malaysians as well as the Chinese Malaysians. So when we conducted these interviews, the work practices, they seem to be differed across the individuals that we interacted with, particularly taking into consideration their ethnic background. So for example, when we talk to a Chinese male or female business owner manager, having a female business owner manager has been viewed within the country as really problematic, to be honest. And in terms of work allocation also, like for women in the country, they wouldn't assign any of the marketing or networking related work. So it's always assigned to the males, irrespective of the experience that women had in their careers. And of course, in India, apart from the religion, caste is the main thing which interferes with the business progress. and also interferes with the individuals and how they are networking with various stakeholders, or how they access government funding. Caste is very ingrained within the SMEs in India. At the micro level, again, family responsibilities, particularly in the Indian context, people have these stereotypical views which they assign. If there is a woman female owner manager for a business, it's always viewed as the woman has been discounting the family at the expense of progressing the business. So we could see a neat intersection of macro, meso, and micro level factors, which are actually contributing to the business growth or business failure. So I may direct you.
Thank you. Now we will move on to the macro level situation in the Indian context. First, we look at the attitudes and perceptions. Obviously, we look at these indicators that are identified in the literature. Know someone who has started a new business. There is a change in all these dimensions, from pre-COVID to during the COVID. I mean, we can't say still we are after the COVID. I think we're still during the COVID. Similarly, the good opportunities to start a business in my area. A lot of entrepreneurs pursue new opportunities, but still there is a slight decline from pre-COVID to the post-COVID. Ease of starting business. Similarly, there is a small reduction in the perception relating to this. About individuals' self-awareness of their skills and knowledge that is required to start a business or to manage a business. Again, there is a slight reduction probably that is expected given the COVID, the situation. The lot of stress that people are under, probably, there is less confidence now compared to previously. But surprisingly, the fear of failure, which probably if you asked me 20 years ago, the fear of failure was very high. And that was the reason why there wasn't so much entrepreneurial initiatives. That has declined, but I think more recently, with the adoption of technology and also the transparency that is now improving in terms of government policy, reduction in corruption, and so on, I think there is improved confidence in the business sector. And we also looked at entrepreneurial intentions, that is their intention to start a new business in the next 2-3 years. That has come down slightly because of the COVID. Okay. Now, I think in terms of these attitudes and perceptions, they are critical. And now there are many role models that people can see and then try to emulate those role models when they take up new business opportunities. Similarly, as I was mentioning earlier, the fear of failure, I think now there is increased understanding that failure, there are lessons that can be learned, useful lessons that can be learned from failure. So there is a change in terms of societal attitudes as well. Obviously, the mental well-being, there is more awareness now with regard to the mental well-being of the entrepreneur, herself or himself. I think the stress during the pandemic, in fact, actually led to negative impacts on productivity, as was found by a survey that was conducted in this study. Now, if you look at the data, I'm sorry about the size of these ones. Compared to other countries of similar nature, Brazil, Indonesia, India has generally underperformed in terms of knowing someone who has started a new business, okay, in the last 2 years, okay. Opportunity perception, this is generally high, that continues to be high. I think people are looking that there are many opportunities, okay. Similarly, India outperformed many other countries in terms of perceived capabilities. I think there is explosion of entrepreneurial education, even though there was more emphasis in the past on technical skills and management skills. There has been recently, there is more emphasis on entrepreneurship, both at the tertiary level and also in the schools. Fear of failure, it continues to be very high. I think that continues to be a barrier. But given there are changes in attitude, I think probably in future there will be more opportunities that will be taken up. In terms of the impact, job creation, we were mentioning at the beginning, SMEs do contribute to a greater extent in terms of job creation. But at the moment, I think there aren't great hopes in terms of job creation. I think the COVID starting March 2020, when the country went into lockdown, many jobs were lost. And then there were many migrant workers who suffered a lot because of the lost jobs. Okay, so there were many issues around that. So job creation opportunities, hopefully they will come back. Internationalization, there is tremendous scope for that, but at the moment, I think like in many other countries, SMEs have a limited role in the Indian context in terms of exporting or internationalizing their operations. Also, I think given the SMEs in India try and focus in a localized context much more, then there is limited, at this stage, there is limited scope for expanding to national stage. Okay, so there is information here. There is the small share of services sector. Okay, there is, SMEs continue to focus more on industrial sector. Employment creation expectations are low in India compared to the other countries. Low share of revenue from exports, okay, particularly in 2021, there wasn't anything at all. Less scope for nationwide expansion and no international revenues for the SMEs. In terms of motivations, many of those entrepreneurs, SMEs, they want to make a difference. They want to build great wealth. Some of them, they want to continue the family tradition. And there is also the necessity-based entrepreneurship. Okay, so in terms of these trends, necessity continues to be a strong motivation compared to other countries. Similarly, building great wealth is a strong motivation. And to make a difference, I think there is increased emphasis on this, particularly with the younger generation or the second and third generations of family businesses. There is also continuing family tradition. This is a strong motivation for many businesses. Okay, there are minor differences between the motivations of female entrepreneurs as well as male entrepreneurs. Fortunately, in the Indian context, there is more and more participation of women entrepreneurs particularly in the services sector. Okay, so there is, as I was mentioning earlier, there's similar motivations for both women and men as well. Okay, in terms of the total entrepreneurial activity, the total early stage entrepreneurial activity and the established business ownership rate, as well as the entrepreneurial employee activity, there is a reduction in 2021 compared to 2020. Okay, so again, if you were to look at established business ownership rate, it's only better than Russia compared to the other countries. Entrepreneurial employee activity is very low in India. Okay, that continues to be the case. So there aren't significant differences between female and male entrepreneurs, as we could see here. Now, let me quickly go on to entrepreneurial framework conditions. In terms of the entrepreneurial framework conditions, India fared better than probably Russia among these countries in terms of government policy and support. Similarly, India experienced an increased availability of finance, but again, there are issues. Even though there is availability of finance, access is still limited because of the COVID and its impact on the credit rating of these businesses. Okay. In terms of entrepreneurial framework conditions 4, 5, 6, and 7, as well as others, there is, as I was mentioning earlier, there is emphasis on entrepreneurship, entrepreneurial education. There are also improvements in R&D transfer. And so in one of the interviews that we conducted, an SME has entered a partnership with a university to engage the university university researchers in terms of product development. So there are new initiatives that are happening in that space. Similarly, still there is the burden of regulations, and that still persists. Market dynamics are improving, and similarly, so if you look at the COVID-related impacts, the pandemic has led household income to decrease. And so if you look at these statistics in terms of, India experienced, like many other countries, new opportunities due to pandemic, particularly in the healthcare space, in the education space. There are many new opportunities that were pursued by entrepreneurs. Second highest business starts, I think, with these comparable countries. A median level of business association. I think these statistics need to be qualified. When the COVID started in March 2020, about 80% of SMEs have put their operations on hold. In the second and third wave, particularly during the second wave, many businesses went out of existence. Okay. So India around this time has experienced highest decline in household income. And unfortunately, there isn't so much government support like in Australia or in other countries. So we really need to see the long-term effects on SMEs and entrepreneurship. I think we need to consider carefully in this context. I think there are some productivity gains that have happened through digital adoptions. Now, the question is, are the SMEs in the developing world, are they able to adopt their processes? Not all businesses have probably the scope to adopt their process. In the services sector, there is the possibility, but in other sectors, I think there is limited scope. Future of work, again, like Sujana was mentioning earlier, particularly in low-tech services or production businesses, there are limited opportunities for this. I think the traditional mode of work continues. Now, how do SMEs become more resilient? I think that continues to be a challenge. And then, of course, how do SMEs contribute to achieving SDGs? There is the increased social entrepreneurship that is happening. But again, I think there is increased awareness in terms of adopting SDGs. But we have to wait and see what the COVID impacts will be, whether they will be long-lasting or whether they will be, whether the situation will be managed better. Okay, I'll stop here. I think we will take any questions.